now on a short video tour of the Roy Rogers Dale Evans Museum.
It is, and it's kind of sad for the family to let it go, but you know, we only hold history for a short time.
The young lady that brought the pies over turned out to be my first wife who...
Roy Rogers, the icon of 1950s American television and the king of the cowboys, in the eyes of millions, now stuns the public after a shocking discovery at his abandoned home in Apple Valley, California. The house once where he spent his final years with Dale Evans was quiet, secluded, and nearly forgotten by the spotlight. It wasn't until early 2025 when a real estate survey team began dismantling the property that an old floor safe was discovered beneath layers of dust and time. Inside, there was only an unlabeled cassette tape and a handwritten note. Do not play unless what you seek is perfection. When the tape was played, a deep, raspy voice spoke. It was unmistakable, Roy Rogers. And in a nearly 30-minute monologue, he recounted in detail a private hearing in 1952 during which Republic Pictures asked him to testify to dismiss allegations of sexual abuse against a prominent director. He admitted he had not been at the scene yet, still signed the statement at the studio's instruction. It was, as he said, for the greater good. If you once believed Roy Rogers to be a flawless, moral figure of classic Hollywood, this tape may make you reconsider. Between truth and reputation, who is strong enough to hold both? In today's video, we take a look back at his life career and the secrets long thought buried. On a bitterly cold spring morning in 1911, inside a rickety wooden house in Cincinnati, Ohio, a boy named Leonard Franklin Sly, who would later be known across America as Roy Rogers, cried his first cry beneath a tin roof and the scent of rust rising from a nearby river. Born into a working-class family, he was the son of a brick factory worker and a frail mother who often had to sew clothes from used fabric because they couldn't afford new ones. In a narrow room, just large enough for 2 wooden beds, an oil stove, and an old radio, Leonard's childhood unfolded in a large world where the factory whistle sounded. Before the rooster's crow and hope was always smaller than the worry of weekend groceries. He was a quiet child who often sat for hours in front of the house watching coal trains pass by as if they carried something he could never name. One sudden move after his father had his work hours cut took the Sly family to California, where they lived in a truck that had been turned into a temporary home. That was when he learned silence, not from books, but from a leaking roof, a meal without meat, and evenings spent listening to his parents whisper about the cost of rent. One day, his grandfather gave him a small guitar made of cheap wood, but with all its strings intact. Leonard didn't know how to play, but he learned by mimicking the melodies from local radio stations. Old cowboy songs, raspy voices carried by desert winds, and the sound of horses' hooves. In that world, music wasn't for performing. It was for surviving and one more day. School for Leonard was a place he often only attended in the mornings. In the afternoons, he worked cutting grass or helped his mother at a nearby farm. But despite the poverty, he never complained. He was a boy who understood early on that while he couldn't choose where he was born, he could choose how to raise his voice in that world. With a guitar, a self-taught voice, and a remarkable memory, Leonard grew up in silence, carrying memories of migration of a roadside house where winter arrived before spring, and of dreams that, if left unspoken, could never be stolen. After leaving school at the age of 17, he worked many jobs. He harvested wheat, drove trucks loaded cargo, and eventually became a laborer at a gas pipe factory. No one at the time imagined that this quiet young man with a low-brimmed hat would become the voice of an entire generation. One day, during a lunch break, Leonard took his wooden guitar to the back of the factory and sang an old cowboy tune. He didn't know that a co-worker had recorded him and sent the tape to a local radio station. Just a few weeks later, he received a phone call from Los Angeles inviting him to audition for a newly formed music group. It was only for background vocals at first, not for stardom. He set off carrying his old guitar, an empty suitcase, and one line from his father: "You don't need to know if you sing well. Just sing truthfully." In Los Angeles, Leonard joined the Sons of the Pioneers, a Western-style vocal group. They quickly rose to fame with songs about rivers, rain, and mountains, especially the tracks Tumbling Tumbleweeds and Cool Water. Leonard's voice wasn't the standout, but it was steady, warm, and rich in storytelling. In 1938, when Gene Autry, then the #1 cowboy star, unexpectedly backed out of a film contract due to a dispute with the Republic Pictures, the studio needed a replacement quickly. Leonard was chosen, not because he was an actor, but because he had the kind of look Americans wanted to believe in. Tall, fair-skinned, with a gentle smile, and a voice that never rushed. The studio gave him a new name, Roy Rogers. And from that moment, Roy began a journey he had never planned. He became the king of the cowboys, the perfect hero for a world in search of something to hold on to after the Great Depression. From the day the name Roy Rogers appeared on movie posters, a new archetype was born. A cowboy who didn't curse, didn't drink, didn't gamble, but still rode fast, shot straight, and always stood up for the weak. That image didn't come from strategy meetings or polished media campaigns. It came from Roy himself, a man who lived by the simple rules he had learned from a poor childhood and long days in the factory. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, he starred in more than 100 Western films. The storylines were often similar. A troubled town. Roy rode in. He resolved everything with integrity, a song and a revolver that never missed the right target. Audiences didn't seek surprises. They needed the feeling of safety. And Roy Rogers delivered that feeling every week consistently without shifting tone. His name appeared across every form of media, from movie theaters to comic books, from radio to television. In 1951, he launched his own TV program, The Roy Rogers Show. It ran for 6 seasons, always ending with a gentle moral lesson and the image of his wife, Dale Evans, sitting beside him. No scandals, no angry faces, just a smile and a closing line: "Happy trails to you until we meet again." While many other cowboy stars remained stuck in rough and violent images, Roy chose gentleness. He didn't raise his voice. He offered trust. Audiences felt like they were listening to a real person, not a fictional character. His most faithful companion, the horse Trigger, also became a symbol. Trigger appeared not only on screen, but in textbooks, toy models, and was even preserved and displayed in Roy's private museum after its death. Trigger was never replaced by another horse because the audience didn't want another horse, just as they didn't want another Roy. Time magazine once wrote, "If America needed a face, to place its trust in Roy Rogers was that face." But because of that, his image became too clean to question. Roy had no visible flaws in public. And in an industry that often hides its mistakes behind the stage lights, someone who is always right gradually creates a space of doubt no one dares to step into. Throughout his life, he faced loss as if it were a natural part of the journey. He didn't run from sorrow. He turned it into music, wove it into stories, and made it into something others could hold on to get through their own hard days. When his daughter Robin died, before reaching the age of 2, Roy didn't say much. But later, he and Dale wrote Angel Unaware, a book told from the perspective of the child as a way to tell other parents that pain could be shared without hiding. And he lived that way, without exaggeration, without dramatization, just leaving enough space in his heart for light to come through. On July 6, 1998, Roy Rogers took his last breath at his home in Apple Valley. He was 86. The cause was congestive heart failure, a slow and silent process he never spoke of publicly. In his final days, he no longer sang. He didn't talk for long. His body could no longer keep up, but everyone who was there said he still smiled. A gentle smile like a breeze across a field, as if he was listening to someone else singing on his behalf. He left behind no long farewell. Instead, there were gentle handshakes, silent but warm glances. He prayed every morning, then lay quietly by the window where the late-day sunlight always touched his lined face with the same tenderness he had once given to the world. One of the most private moments took place just a few days before he passed away. His son Dusty came to visit after many years of distance. Their relationship had once been strained due to differences in beliefs, values, and lifestyle. But in that room, there was no more arguing, no more space between them. When Dusty held his father's hand, Roy looked at him for a moment, then whispered softly enough for only those nearby to hear, "I never thought I would see you in heaven." It wasn't a joke, it wasn't an accusation, it was a quiet way of admitting that some cracks never heal, but can still be gently accepted before the end. And in that moment, Roy Rogers, once the flawless face of a generation, reached the most honest truth a father could carry. He knew he had been wrong and still hoped they would meet again. After Roy Rogers passed away, the house in Apple Valley where he and Dale Evans had lived for more than 30 years grew so quiet that at times it felt like it had never existed. The Western-style ranch home, with its wide porch and empty stables, had once welcomed friends, pastors, orphans, and even fans who had only known him through the screen. But when both Roy and Dale were gone, no one came anymore. There was no heritage sign, no private museum, no guided tours. The house was left untouched. It wasn't renovated or sold, as if those who remained feared that any change would shatter the peace he had left behind. The doors were locked, the curtains drawn, the wind crossed the porch like an old visitor. Time laid dust on everything. On the untuned guitar, on the tilted portrait of Trigger, and on the attic's office where Roy once recorded, read fan letters, and wrote songs he never sent. In 2025, when the state of California launched a project to review abandoned properties and overlooked historical estates, Roy Rogers' house appeared on the checklist. A team of technicians was sent to assess its deterioration before deciding whether to demolish or preserve it. No one expected much, but when they stepped into the attic, a room that had been locked for decades, they discovered a floor safe hidden beneath old planks next to a dusty Marshall amplifier. Inside was a single unlabeled cassette tape and a folded note in rough handwriting. Clearly Roy's "Do not play unless what you seek is perfection." The tape was quickly sent to the California Audio Archive Center. When the sound was cleaned and played back, the voice on the tape was unmistakable, deep, raspy, with that distinct rhythm millions once knew by heart from the radio. It was the voice of Roy Rogers. And what he said next was not meant for the public in 1952, perhaps not even for the public in 1998. But somehow Roy had left it for us. At a moment in time when people are forced to ask what is hidden behind every public hero in exchange for silence. At first, the sound was faint, a soft hiss, as if even time needed a few seconds to remember the voice of a man who had been gone for over 2 decades. Then it cleared. A short breath, a pause. Then Roy Rogers spoke. He wasn't reading a script. He wasn't singing. It was just his real voice. Tired, honest, never broadcast before. I lied in the 1952 hearing. He paused, then continued. Republic told me that if I didn't speak up, everything would collapse. The girl was a new actress. Nobody knew her name, but the other man, he had directed the 5 highest-grossing films of the previous year. I was asked to sign a statement saying I was present during the shoot that day and that I saw nothing unusual. Roy admitted on the tape that he had not been there that day. He was away filming on location. But when he returned, the studio led him into a private room where 3 people were waiting: a corporate lawyer, a PR representative, and a vice president. The statement was already written. All he had to do was sign. They didn't threaten me, he said. They just looked at me, as if I was already part of it. Part of the clean, proper, trustworthy image. And once you are the face of trust, you are not allowed to scare the public. According to what was told on the tape, the young actress, her name never mentioned, had once played a minor role in one of Roy's films. After she filed the complaint, she vanished from all future schedules. She never appeared in any other Republic projects again. No one asked. No one checked. Roy said he stayed silent all his life, not out of fear, but because he believed the public didn't need to know. That the truth, if told at the time, would not have saved anyone. It would have destroyed what was left. I'm not proud of that. But I don't know if regret comes in time. Maybe, if someone is listening to this tape, what they really want to know isn't what I did, but whether they would do it differently if they were me. The tape ended without music. No farewell, just a final breath. Then the sound of the stop button being pressed. Clear, dry, like a punctuation mark placed after years of silence. Away from the stage lights, Roy Rogers was a devoted husband and a father who stumbled many times but never gave up. His marriage to Dale Evans was not just an artistic partnership. It was an American symbol of a couple who endured not because they were perfect, but because they faced together what could not be controlled. Dale was Roy's 3rd wife, but the only one who stayed with him until the very end. They met on a film set in 1944, when Dale was a singer trying to break into radio, and Roy was already a familiar cowboy face. They married in 1947. No scandals, no major press conferences, just 2 people choosing to walk together in an industry where most parted ways halfway through the road. Together, they raised a total of 9 children, including biological children, children from previous marriages, adopted children, and orphans. But that family was not a home of constant smiles. Among their children was Robin Elizabeth, the first biological daughter of Roy and Dale, born with Down syndrome and passed away before she turned 2. That pain was not hidden. They wrote about it, spoke about it, and gave other parents a language to share their sorrow without shame. The other children, like Dusty Roy's son from a previous marriage, grew up surrounded by love but not immune to distance. Each had their own personality, their own direction. Some followed artistic paths. Others chose to quietly step away from the spotlight. But all were raised in a home where faith was not a strict rule, but a constant effort to believe in goodness even when it was hard to find. Roy and Dale did not avoid conflict. They spoke openly about their disagreements on parenting, on religion, and even spent time sleeping in separate rooms. But because they didn't hide, because they didn't paint a perfect picture, their family was seen as real in a Hollywood full of carefully crafted images. Years after Dale passed away, a grandchild once asked Roy if he thought he had been a good father. Roy didn't answer right away. He simply looked out into the distance and said, "I wasn't the best, but I stayed longer than the better ones." When Roy Rogers gently squeezed his son's hand and whispered those last words, "I never thought I would see you in heaven," he wasn't just saying goodbye. He was closing a life lived fully in belief, in regret, and in forgiveness. In those final hours, he didn't sing. He didn't tell stories. He only smiled, prayed, and let his presence, however faint, speak for the things he had kept to himself throughout his career. And then people began to look back. A man who had once dropped out of school from exhaustion, who had worked in labor camps during the Great Depression, who almost gave up on music, if not for a sister who sewed him his first cowboy outfit. The boy Leonard Sly, who once fell asleep in class after working night shifts, had finally stepped onto America's stage, not with rebellion but with perseverance and a quiet refusal to give in. Roy Rogers was not just the king of the cowboys. He was a man who knew how to hold on to what was right, even if he wasn't always brave enough to speak the full truth. Unlike many of his peers who lost everything to bad financial choices or the cost of fame, Roy lived modestly, invested carefully, and kept the rights to his image. By the time he passed away, his estate was estimated at around $150 million. But the greatest value wasn't in that number. It was in a lifetime of tireless work, beginning in America's poorest class, through local radio songs, through countless westerns, through every episode of The Roy Rogers Show aired during prime time, through the children's books he wrote after retiring from performance. And now, after that cassette tape with his final silence turned into a late confession, people understand that the legacy Roy Rogers left behind was never about perfection. It was about choosing to face his mistakes with conscience, not denial. If there were no valleys of sorrow and death, we could never truly appreciate the sunlight on the mountaintop. That wasn't just a beautiful sentence. It was a philosophy forged through poverty, through loss, through the hearings he never fully spoke about, and through the moment he chose to make peace with his son, rather than cling to a father's pride. If you once loved Roy Rogers for his smile, his voice, or the loyal horse Trigger, then hopefully today you can love him once more for the part he once tried to hide. What do you think about that tape? Will you remember Roy Rogers more for the title, King of the Cowboys, or for that raspy voice, quietly admitting I signed it even though I wasn't there? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you can follow the journeys never told before. The stories that begin where the spotlight ends and the real person finally begins.